Hi everyone, welcome to the Art Forum for this week. My name's Matt Warren and I teach at the School of Creative Arts and Media in Hobart, and I'm here today to introduce you to our presenter, Travis Tiddy. But first I'd like to say that I and those of us here on the Hunter Street campus in Nipaluna, Hobart, are meeting on the land beneath the skies and alongside the waterways of the Muwinina people, who are the traditional custodians of this place. And I also acknowledge that we have people tuning in from our northern campus and from other parts of the state and potentially the rest of Australia. And I respectfully acknowledge that this country has a long and profound Indigenous history that should be acknowledged and considered for its rich cultural importance. And we should also reiterate that sovereignty was never ceded and the land was taken by force. And I look forward to a day when there is a greater understanding of the privilege we have to live, meet and work on this land. So today I'm here to introduce Travis Tiddy to speak to you all, and I've known Travis for about 12 or so years due to my various interactions and involvement with the Unconformity Festival, and even prior to the rebrand when it was known as the Queenstown Heritage and Arts Festival. And I have a personal link to Queenstown in that as a teenager of around 15 or 16, an early band I played in would travel down from the northwest coast to play many weekends on the west coast of Tasmania, and Queenstown was often the most wild and funnest, and many a Friday or a Saturday night spent in the Empire Hotel was, shall we say, formative. Much later, as an undergrad here, I was part of a collective called Empire, which created live public art events. And in late 1997, we toured the state and ended our tour of live sound and slide and projection, video projection and so on, in Queenstown, performing in front of the Paragon Theatre and broadcasting back to Hobart via a primitive silent video chat browser hooked into the Queenstown library internet system, very long cable, and with sound played over a payphone over the road from the theatre. It was very wild and it was quite DIY and really spoke of Queenstown's spirit of just getting in there and doing stuff from the ground up. Later still, I was part of a number of projects down there, including the 2012 Queenstown Heritage and Arts Festival, when I first met Travis, and I was struck by his passion for a festival that had rigour and integrity, that could stand alongside other festivals with from bigger centres, while still retaining a strong grassroots element with proudly local contributions, working alongside work by ring-ins such as myself and my peers. Okay. Or something like that. Much of that vision was from Travis and his dedication to the festival, but perhaps more importantly, his dedication to Queenstown, feeling like it had ownership and pride in its festival. Having recently departed from the Unconformity, Travis will reflect on his curatorial career, share insights into his regional roots, his formative experiences here at the University of Tasmania School of Art, and the complexities of developing site-responsive cultural frameworks in remote areas of Lutruwita, Tasmania, including future directions for his artistic practice. So please welcome Travis Tiddy.
Thanks, Matt. Can you monitor time for me to make sure that I'm on track and not talking for too long throughout this hour? Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here speaking today about my experiences as an artist as an artistic director, as somebody who's worked on the organisational side of the arts ecology. I would like to just kick off by acknowledging the first people here of Lutruwita. I acknowledge that this land was never ceded, and I'd also like to express my energy and my time and my commitment to supporting collaboration and the voice of First Peoples across this island into the future. As Matt said, I'm the recently departed artistic director of the Unconformity. That'll be a fairly dominant thing that I talk through today, alongside some other aspects of my journey. I will acknowledge that somebody else was announced as the new artistic director about 15 minutes ago, Lauren Kronemeyer, who's seems to be very, very well loved and supported artist based here in Tasmania, and I think it's a great appointment. I'm looking forward to seeing what Lauren devises. I want to give a shout out to Denise and the students up at the Inverest campus. G'day, Denise. Just a bit of a challenge to try and evoke a question from the students there towards the end, if you can. And also Helena, who's on the West Coast listening in. A lot of love and thanks and appreciation in your direction, Helena. I just want to start off by asking for a bit of a show of hands of people who have actually been to the West Coast in the room here today. Yeah, it's pretty good. That's nice to see. I asked that question because for a regional and remote part of this state, it's always surprising just how many people have some form of connection with this place. It lives large in the minds of Tasmanians. It is a place, I think it's really important to acknowledge where you're from, where you come from, and what sort of, in a foundation sense, underpins who you are and what you do. And for me, I'm a fourth generation person who's born and raised in Queenstown, the infamous mining town and the largest town on the West Coast. You can see here the West Coast is positioned far-flung on the western fringe. As a municipality, the West Coast Council is about the size of the country of Cyprus, or about a third of the size of Belgium. So it's a really large landmass, but only 4,000 people live there, spread across 5 very small towns. It is a regional place. It's quite remote in a Tasmanian context. This image shows the Lyle Highway a couple of years ago, the main arterial conduit between Hobart and Queenstown. And it sort of shows the challenges in actually being landlocked at various times of the year. It's a place that can be inaccessible, and it's a part of the fabric of being there, living there, and getting to and from the place. It's mountainous, it's treacherous, it's cold, it's windy, it's wet, and it can be incredibly dangerously beautiful. However, what Queenstown is perhaps best known for is its mining heritage, which is pictured here. The Mount Lyell mine is regarded as illustrious in the annals of Australian mining history. For generations, it extracted copper from under the mountains and fed it into a global supply chain. And Queenstown prospered from that mineral extraction, and Tasmania as a whole prospered from that exchange. However, the legacy it created through this mining activity is in creating what's regarded as perhaps the national epicentre for environmental trauma. And the legacy of that is still apparent on the fabric of Queenstown and the landscape. And in some ways it can be regarded as an apex representation of colonialism and the extractive forces of colonialism. In this image, you can see just how tightly interwoven that industry is with the community itself. The bare hills of Gormanston, with the mining activity central. And on the right-hand side, you can see suburban Queenstown. So the place is so synonymous with mining history and the environment and what was caused by that activity, because the demarcations between that mine site and suburban Queenstown are so blurry. Back fences meet the actual mine site itself. There's an orange river that runs through the middle of Queenstown. If you kick a footy too far and too hard, it'll land in that river and flow down to what's known as South Queenstown. Queenstown does have a South Queenstown for such a small place. So the relationship between industry and environment in this place is extreme. So you could say that the relationship between these forces has defined Queenstown as a place and its identity for generations, and that definition is about what it has been and what it has done, and the legacy of that activity. And the legacy of those choices and those actions, in a sense, there's an incredible violence and a masculine sort of energy, and there's been an indifferent terraforming of Queenstown as a place. But these qualities, as somebody who was born and raised in this setting, it also renders the most amazing sort of characteristics as a place to be. It's a community that's in a valley, as you can see here in this image. One of Tasmania's leading architects, Matt Hines, describes Queenstown in a spatial sense as being pressured into the valley, pressured by the mountains. And that creates the most extraordinary qualities as a place. Everybody is in everybody's business. You can't escape it. There's shared knowledge about what's happening and what this place is. As a kid growing up there, you can be trusted to get on your bike and you just roam because you've got the barriers of the valley, so you roamed with impunity. There's water holes everywhere because you're in the middle of the valley. It's incredible at summertime. There's an aspect of being on the West Coast and getting familiar with the image of the sun setting over the Indian Ocean. You know, it's the West Coast. So the incredible draw of the sunset means that the pink-orange glow hits the mountains at various times of the year. There's an incredible sense of home. That's a very strong felt. It's more than just a beautiful image. That's a sense of place that's hard to replicate. So what is in Queenstown is a vastness, there's a dangerousness, and there's a beauty that is just rendered into everyday life. It's a sort of foundry, in a sense, for raising people who have this shared sense of identity and history, a very high capacity for social engagement and bonding, and this communal sense of living with complexity. I left the West Coast as a 17-year-old and came down here in 2001 to the School of Art here on Hunter Street. I didn't really know what I was doing. My art teacher at Helier College actually wrote my application for me to come down to university. I also didn't really know where I'd be heading to. I bounced around here at the art school in my shorts and my t-shirt. Country guy come to the city. I think I was perhaps the only person of my age who went on to higher education from the West Coast. So I felt very much like I was here in a new world and new experiences. I think what came to me in my second year of being here at the School of Art, I started turning my gaze back to the West Coast. And as a type of focus or a type of fuel, I guess, for my work, these are a couple of images of my year 2 photography work at that stage. I gravitated back to a place that's called the Lake Margaret Power Station, which is 10 kilometres away from Queenstown. It's a really significant industrial and social site of really strong national importance and significance. And it's located in the foothills of Mount Sedgwick. An amazing place, and this is one of the abandoned houses. As I was taking these actual images a long time ago, I still recall Tim Adams, the last resident of this town, just materialised behind me in this empty room and popped up, and he started telling me the people who'd been birthed and conceived in different rooms in these houses. And then when I told him who I was, you know, I'm Travis Tiddy, he's like, oh, you're a Tiddy, okay. Your family, you're here, you can roam, it's fine. So those social connections were working really well. I grew, my focus in third years was on e-media as a major, and I've still focused on the West Coast with my body of work. And then I took a year off from university. It was a really unproductive year and a challenging year, to be honest. A lot of lack of direction, not sure what came next. And university called me back for a year of honours in 2005, which I needed at the time, which was in visual communication. And I drifted back to the West Coast in my focus. I did a body of work which was installation and video-based and design-based and wayfinding-based, trying to deconstruct what this place meant as a site and how you'll communicate essential ideas of place about Lake Margaret to visitors. And that went well, and I've always had the carrot of coming back to university at some point, which might still be a part of my future, who knows. And post-honours was a time of 3 or so years. I worked as a freelancer, worked on public art projects, took on design work, cultural strategies, just a broad range of projects and possibilities whilst I was still trying to sort of forge my way forward. Following a year of overseas, or a period, I should say, of overseas travel, I went back to stay with mum and dad, mainly because I was broke, and just got involved on the West Coast, on the community, within the community, and I started a little studio space in an old heritage building in Queenstown, just with the idea of doing something. I wasn't sure what that would be. We had a very wild opening night for that space, and I think about a week later I was doing a presentation at the West Coast Council meeting, and the West Coast Mayor mentioned how that had kicked on late into the evening, and it was a notorious sort of social thing that happened in Queenstown that night. And I remember feeling pretty chuffed that was the boundary of my world, that the West Coast Mayor had mentioned me and our activities. It was so good. The genesis of the cultural organisation on the West Coast that I started working with is way back in 1984 when I was 1 year old. This was a community organisation that had just evolved over time through volunteerism. It had changed its focus and direction time and time again and rebirthed itself as an organisation. In 2008, I joined this committee, which was called Project Queenstown. And at that time, it was putting out a survey locally to work out where the future direction of that small committee and where its investments lay. Interestingly, people came back and said they wanted a festival. They didn't have a festival on the West Coast. And we were the fools who would ask the question, and we thought, well, okay, why don't we give this thing a crack? So we held a meeting in the old council chambers, this building where all the old mayors and wardens of the West Coast, their portraits hung all over the walls. You know, we were in there devising what this festival would be, and we decided it would be an arts festival. There were about 30 people in the room. I still remember that conversation. I might have lent on that conversation a little bit to steer it into the direction of being an arts festival. Could have been anything at that point in time. Our methodology was pretty simple. We'd just build a festival. We hadn't done one before, but we'll give it a crack. Let's see how this goes. I think there was a sort of foundation sense that, we are out here on the West Coast. The nearest sort of city is 2.5 hours away. This is the thing that we would build. We didn't have a language around what we were doing at the time, but already back then we were following a site responsive or this was not a commission, not a curatorial based festival in the sense that, we weren't going and selecting work to be presented during the festival program. We actually constructed the entirety of the bloody thing. we didn't know that there was any other way to do it, to be honest. It's only in recent history that I've come to understand that this is a really pretty unique approach and a very labour-intensive approach. We held our first festival in 2010. The sort of didactic sort of title of Queenstown Heritage and Arts Festival has a bit of irony, because who could imagine that there'd ever be such a thing in this part of the world, really? It was held to a budget of $50,000. It seemed to go really well. We thought, let's give it another crack, and we decided at that stage, let's do it every 2 years. Let's be a biennial thing. We understood that there's only a certain level of community capacity that can support something like this. Let's do it every 2 years. And we sped through those 6 years, I guess, 2012 and then 2014. The 2014 festival happened around 12 months after 2 fatal incidents in the Mount Lyell mine. So that's the festival moment when this mining town lost its mine, and the arts became, I guess, a more purposeful sort of driver of local meaning and local context and local livability and the local economy in one sense. You can see that in the poster for 2014. There's a sort of hazard tape sort of element we're trying to communicate through that image, and the poster is, the image of that festival is underwater. There's a sense of a place holding its breath. We wanted to communicate that deeper rationale through how we presented ourselves to the world through that festival. So already we were sort of grabbing onto these deeper associations and trying to bring them forward in a singular and really powerful sense. There were some characteristics in those early festivals which are still true of the Unconformity to this day. We had Hannah presenting from Constance at last week's art forum. We partnered with Constance, who were then known as In-Flight, for our second festival, and together we commissioned some works from artists based around the state. This is a work called The Drink by Peter Waller. For those who have driven to Queenstown from Hobart, when you get to Linda, which is a small town on the outskirts of Queenstown, there's an old 3-storey shell of a building on the right-hand side, which is the old Royal Linda Hotel. And this work by Peter excavated into the old dining room of this concrete shell. It's called The Drink. He installed these amazing steel rods from the roof, which had this very simple sense of creating sightlines which caused depth when looking at this reflective image, and brought this sort of vertical space into the work in a really interesting way. Our audiences, this is our second festival, our audiences would come out to this site of really significant meaning for a lot of people, especially on the West Coast. And the volunteer who was often there meeting people and talking about the work was somebody who was born in Linda and who had drunk in those rooms. And the levels of the relational sort of levels were there from the get-go with what we were doing in a really intrinsic way. And as a cultural experience for audiences, for their understanding of the West Coast and their sort of pushing the boundaries of their knowledge and what this place is and what it can be. There's a sort of methodology there that was working from the early days. We had a work by Claire Kruzecki and Rafe Sawford called Prospectus, bringing the surrounding landscape into the main street of Queenstown. And at the Lake Margaret Power Station, Dean Chapman created a work, Radiate, surrounding the hydroelectric sites are all these ladybugs, which are just there pulled on the floor. So we use them materially in his work. There are lots more, but I thought these three were interesting to show images of. By this stage, we'd been working on the festival for 6 years, which is a fairly long period of time in the sense that we delivered 3 festivals. But I subscribe to the perspective of somebody who, Professor Peter Matthews, who has this notion that every 7 years is a point of renewal, which I think is such a fantastic sort of idea. I really subscribe to that in a roundabout sense. Every 7 years feels like a moment of change. It definitely was for us. We had audiences who loved the festival. They were skewing generally older, perhaps because of the heritage side of the program. They were people who had an existing connection with the West Coast, who were drawn back to reconnect with the experience through this contemporary art lens. And that was important, and that was strong and well and good, but we thought there was a deeper possibility and a new audience who could be brought into the West Coast story. And we just felt the urge to make a big strategic shift. We did so by embracing the local geological story. We sought this idea that could represent all the colliding forces of the West Coast, which can be uncomfortable. They can be viewed as negative, but they exist. It's part of the DNA. It is a part of the story. It shouldn't be overlooked. And so we embraced the unconformity, which an unconformity being a geological term for a meeting point of geological ages. In this sense, this is the haulage unconformity, which is up in Bachelor's Quarry near the Mount Lyell mine. You can see the schism in the middle, which is one age touched and compressed by the other 2 ages. And I sort of have mentioned this story a few times in the past, but I remember sitting in a car down at Salamanca when I had this click moment where, it's unconformity. That's what we are. That's what we'll turn into. And I called our chair at the time just to say, we're turning into the unconformity. What do you think? And he's an old dyed in the wool West Coaster who owns a construction company. And he was like, Trav, okay. Sounds interesting. And I was like, it's up in Bachelor's Quarry. And he's like, I own Bachelor's Quarry. And I was like, the synergies run really deep on the West Coast, that's for sure. That became our defining image and idea, I guess. We didn't use a single image of our festivals to promote who we were. We weren't, the conventional method of promoting an experience or a festival program is that you will show images of people engaging with artwork or seeing live music. We've never done that. This is all about an expression of place. And the strength of standing behind an image and understanding the meaning of that image and letting that do the work, letting that communicate. Our proposition was that this is a challenge to even get to this festival sometimes. You've got to step into the unknown in a sense. But if you do and you connect with this place, the exchange can be really rewarding. And audiences did respond. We saw a really big uplift in people aged 25 to 34. We saw consecutive festivals with uplifts in visitor numbers. We, perhaps most importantly, about 6 in 10 visitors thought that the unconformity changed their perception of Queenstown, and the majority planned to come back. So what it turned into all of a sudden was this audience development sort of construct, in a sense, for the West Coast. And that was built on just adhering to this idea of what is the fabric of this place and what is the meaning and how can we surface this in an authentic way. And you can see that in the 2018 festival program, that the meeting of the King and Queen Rivers is called the Confluence. And this is us, the thematic, the grounding idea for that year was this idea of truth and the ground truth and being in the field and seeing information at its source. And the unifying idea was, well, this is our truth. This is not something we're proud of, but it's part of our DNA. It's not just our legacy, it's yours too. And so the direction of promoting a come for a weekend arts experience by showing your most polluted asset is fairly unconventional, but it felt absolutely the right thing to be doing. I guess, first and foremost, whilst the Unconformity's presence was catalysing all this interesting change on the West Coast, it was supporting the economy, it was causing people to want to move there and live there, and it was sort of validating the art sector as a space for people to work in within this hyper-regional context. We still understood that we were an arts organisation. That was our prime sort of reason for being. And our approach in a sort of programming sense was to strive for these exemplar quality sort of experiences and processes, and have an embedded quality within Queenstown to that experience, program across the whole valley community, where it became a little bit art form agnostic. We were interested in people and relationships, and we weren't ideas or pitch driven. It's not how we operated. But we sort of created an invitation for people to come and spend time here, and from that time and exchange, quite often something would be evoked. In this sense, just some of the works we did as Unconformity, this is an 8.8 tonne boulder, which we dropped onto the main street, and it caused tectonic ripples throughout the entire valley. That's a work by Ian Pidd, Martin Coots and Dylan Sheridan. Mish Grigor and Zoe Scoglio created Cake Mountain in the days before COVID. That was a communal eating experience with everyone tucking in with spoons and taking people into the landscape in a live art performance. Thomas Kelly with Tasdance devised this work in Queenstown that Thomas Kelly, being an Aboriginal man from the mainland, devised this work, which saw dancers within the Queen River, in a sense, standing in the mess. And we didn't receive any health and safety sort of complaints afterwards from. They still exist. Their ankles still haven't rusted away. They're still here as far as I know. Housey and McLeod took audiences underground into a mine shaft, and through that work was exploring the geology of grief, and on a moving train station. Activating limestone quarries into a singing bowl, a work by David Patman, Michelle Boyd, Jason James and Liquid Architecture. And ending our festivals with a match on the footy oval, which was the West versus the rest, the embodiment of the sort of audience meeting point that's going on with the festival. This is a poster of the 2023 festival. I think it embodies so much of how I think and how I feel about the place-based sort of qualities in regards to artistic practice. I don't think that sort of concept of site responsive and context sensitive and all those words we use, or the buzzwords in a sense that we use, they're not a programming theme, and they're not just throwaway ideas or just a temporary direction. It's sort of like an embodied logic that underpins everything that you do. All choices, all conversations, every lens that we had across our actions was through the logic of place. What is the meaning of this in this sort of responsive way to this location? And I think that relates to this image of the 2023 festival. So the idea at that point was, the theming idea for that festival started with our creative producer saying, well, how the fuck do you program when the world's burning down? And so our theme was, well, how do we exist within discontinuity, which is embodied in a very local context on the West Coast, but it relates to us all. And we located this image, which to a lot of West Coast people would immediately recognise as a weathered tree stump on the hills overlooking Queenstown. They drive past it so often. But there's slippage. It can, some people think it's bone, other people think it's this sort of macro sort of image of an item, or it could be a bird's eye view of a landscape. It sort of tugs west in an interesting way. It offers this, it's quite fragmented, but it is a held together image. And I show that because the amount of conversations we had about what image we land on to represent ourselves to the world, and make sure that the intention behind this was sound and it would work. That's the idea of being place driven. And you can't do it any other way in a place like, in the context of Queenstown. There's a grafting and a hard sort of road in even doing this in the first place. But you almost wouldn't have it any other way, given the challenging sort of makeup of the place. There was a point where we realised that the Unconformity wasn't just a festival. There was so much more going on that it was sort of a framework, this sort of cultural framework. And I've used in the past this concept of the Unconformity being more of an idea or a platform than solely this sort of binary festival. And that's been important to our existence. To give an example, we commenced an online platform called Moonland, which would commission writing from artists and writers and community members about regional practice and connect their work and their voice directly with audiences. We started an artist in residence program in 2018, which was funded. And we saw 31 artists spend about 450 days in total in residence on the West Coast, including Matt at one point in time. We developed programs that supported regional artists and regional practice across commissioning streams and seed funding streams and professional development, and we presented their work to audiences during the festival as well. We developed a drive-in cinema as a pop-up event on the runway outside of Queenstown, devised by David Patman, had some curatorial involvement with Matt as well on the panel. And that project was a sub-concept of the Unconformity that evolved over time. It was a live-streamed event that was a drive-in cinema, and then it was a pop-up TV station in 2023. I think my proudest work, has been the projects and the residencies we've set up to work with Palawa people in relation to the West Coast of Lutruwita. We're under no illusions about the challenges in this part of the world in an incredibly remote and regional place. It is traditionally non-diverse. We know there was a lot of complexity with the voice referendum. Even amongst Aboriginal communities, there wasn't a consensus on voting yes or no, but on the West Coast, 9 out of 10 people voted no. It is a place in which cultural expression, in a contemporary sense with Palawa people, there's a growing and building visibility and awareness. And I think the Unconformity has played a role in supporting that. And we've worked with some incredible people from community with this idea that we are just in our way through our part of the world, through the relationships that we hold on the West Coast, supporting cultural expression across the island as best we can. And I think this image is in talking about this with this image in mind, I've got this isn't actually the person, but one of the pop-up events during UnTV station was a live hosted panel by Gillian Mundy, who's an author, a Palawa author, curator, photographer, artist, who live hosted a conversation through UnTV station with Teresa Sainty and Denny Proctor about the patriarchy and the West Coast, and being there in that time and place in that capacity was something that I'll hold on to for a long time. So yeah, that's a bit of a nutshell of my story with the Unconformity. Earlier this year, I came to a point where I thought my time with the organisation was sunsetting. I started this story as a 25-year-old who was completely green behind the ears and had no idea of what I was doing, and no experience with the professional arts landscape. Never worked for another arts organisation. In that time, we held 7 festivals, hosted about 235, specifically 235 projects. I'm a bit of a data nerd. That's 37% of my life spent on this project. I turned 40 earlier, or last year, and when I made the decision, I was 40 years old, and I thought it's time for something new. It's time for a new phase. The organisation itself is in a really healthy position financially. It's got an incredible team, and it's got a really bright future. So going out in strength. Founding people can sometimes be problems. I don't think I was a problem when I moved on. I made that choice myself. What did I learn during that time with the Unconformity? Time is such an interesting commodity, I think, within the sector, especially within festivals, which pull apart and condense time in harrowing ways sometimes. However, working with an organisation in which the horizon is in the distant future, when you're talking with artists, when you're sitting down and having an exchange, you can be thinking in a further time context than what is normally afforded to artists. I think there's a tendency within the sector for that horizon or for that field of vision to be narrowed and brought down further through the transactive nature of getting the funding and doing the project or securing the next gallery or talking with that festival. So being able to actually stretch the horizon, I think, has with continuity, has been something I've learned with the Unconformity, but is very rare. I strongly value process over the resolved sort of shiny outcome of contemporary art and artistic experience. I think that's foundational to me. I don't subscribe to the froth and the flurry of debating whether work was good or not. I think you commit to process, you understand what you're doing, and then you back yourself in and you take risks in that sense. And generally things work out, but the process being so important and that relational underpinning about process being integral to what I've done in the past. I'm really deeply interested in cultural structures. I don't subscribe to the myth of the artistic director who is the singular visionary for organisations. There's a whole ecosystem around cultural organisations, and quite often artists are the most disempowered people within those structures. I see the role of creative and cultural and artistic leaders as being mediators between those difficult worlds of funding bodies and governance structures and bureaucracy to really carve out and preserve space for artists to do what they need to do, because quite often those structures will actually, they enable the work to happen, but they also threaten it at the same time. And I think that mediating work is really critical. I think just getting an understanding over time of how cultural organisations work, and especially festivals, they're such complex, such powerful parts of the ecosystem in what they control in the delivery of art and artistic experience, but they also change direction very, very, very slowly. I often have this analogy with festivals that there's so many people involved that when it gets moving, it's like a rolling boulder, and course correcting something like a rolling boulder is nigh impossible. So they move incredibly slowly, which also means that we should be talking about alternative models. What I've spoken about today, I guess I've realised post leaving Unconformity on the 2nd of August, which is not too far in the past. All of these things are not just things that I've left behind in a job. I've really embodied them, I've learned. I think they're not throwaway concepts. They're really important, and they're going to keep informing my perspective and my future within this space. I wrapped up with the Unconformity only a few weeks ago. Since then, I've been building. So I've had a long summer project of building a multifunction workbench. As usual, I've overthought it and over-engineered it. And I've also been building a beehive because they're about to swarm. If there's any good thing about the recent winds and the rain, it's delayed the swarms. And I've been building the beehive with the kids, and I'm about to welcome 50 to 60,000 bees into my life, but the beehive's nearly ready. I share this in a sense because I've reached a certain nexus in where I'm heading to within my own practice. But I've realised, I think, that I'm a builder. Not in that sense. I like to construct things. I think you find a way or you make it. So I'm a bit unsure what the future holds for me professionally. Keen to remain engaged with the sector, and I'm really itching to walk towards, I guess, that next challenge. Happy for questions, especially from your team today.
Do you have any questions?
Hey, Travis. You can probably hear me without this. Curious to know what your experiences were with the locals, both embracing the festival and in some years having reservations or reticence to engage with creative practice.
Yeah, how long do we have? I do get asked that question a lot, and it's not a simple answer. I guess there's a few aspects to that. This is a place that for generations has been defined by what it has done. And the story of Queenstown and the West Coast, in a sense, is it's almost like there's a fixed sense of what this place is. And even when I look at the way in which the region is promoted to tourists, it's promoted on the back of World Heritage. It's Get to Strawn. It's the Western Wilds, when 4 out of those 5 towns are mining towns. So there's this dissonance in how a region has sort of built itself up to present to the world and what it actually is. So the choice to be in that sort of setting and embracing professional practicing artists, inviting them in, supporting the presentation of work has really been on a knife edge at sometimes. It's got an inbuilt risk to it in a sense, but that's the mission. Like we could be programming comfortably to audiences who are conversant with what we're doing and coming in, but that's not our choice. We want to be there because that's the richness of the exchange. That's the importance of the exchange. And, I'm talking about 15 years, and there's 15 years worth of youth in Queenstown growing up with something like the Unconformity present in their lives, something I didn't have when I was there. About 5 years ago, there was a stat. About 5 years ago, there was a statistic that about 50% of the population on the West Coast had lived there for 5 years or less. So it's a really transient community. And I often find when I talk about the history of the Unconformity, I'm educating people locally about what has happened because they weren't there for it. And so there is a lot of support on the West Coast for what we were doing, but there are people who also view us as being this sort of catalytic sort of presence that's causing change. I stand behind that 100% and think that should be the case. But, walk down the street and ask anyone anything these days, you're going to get a variety of opinions. I'm sort of just speaking very openly. There's a lot of support on the West Coast for the Unconformity, and that manifests during every festival. The volume of connections that enable that festival to happen are huge. I went through and counted after 2023 just how many partnerships were in place, and there were well over 100 just enabling the festival to be there in the first place. So they wouldn't exist if there wasn't support for the festival.
We do have one question from up this end of town when you're ready.
Okay.
Hi. I haven't been to the Unconformity because I don't drive, but I think a lot of the work that you showed came across to me as kind of a collaboration between the artist and the site, and I wondered what kind of difficulties you've had producing site-specific works in potentially sort of volatile spaces.
Yeah, it's one of our biggest challenges in the past, and I should talk in a previous context. I'm no longer with the organisation, so these are my opinions. They're not the opinions of the new artistic director as of 12 o'clock today, is that there's no fixed venue at all when you start devising the next program. It's like, well, where is this going to happen? And through doing that, you're actually stripping away parameters which can be really defining for the presentation of work in ordinary context. You know, we talk about galleries, we talk about performing arts venues, like in the city here. For an artist, you're going into that space and you're spatially engaging with it straight away, and you're making choices about just working within this space within a fixed sort of conversation. To me, there's a fixed sort of range to that conversation, whereas the concept that you're presenting within an embedded community context, there's an open field, like and quite often we'll be talking things through for a long time with no idea where this will be manifesting, but that's part of the conversation. Interestingly, the local mining company was always very supportive and would often take artists underground and let them get on site to support this sort of critical inquiry within the mine site itself, which was always really valued. So yeah, there's no, we've presented work in such diverse contexts, underground, in sheds, you know, inquiries, tops of mountains. Last year we took 75 people walking to the top of the mountain as an experiential sort of almost land art type work. So that's almost an aspect of programming that comes midway through, interestingly.
Denise in Launceston, I think you have a question.
Thanks, Travis. I'm Fenella. I just wanted to know, in all your years, and congratulations on doing such an amazing job for the West Coast and Tasmania with the Unconformity Festival, but in all your years, is there one standout moment that gave you the warmest, fuzziest feelings or the greatest sense of accomplishment?
This might be a bit close to home in this room, but there was a work in 2012 by Matt Warren. No, I'm going to raise this in the sense that there was a work by Matt and Darren Cook in the old Queenstown hospital when it had closed, and I remember walking away from that work after seeing it with my mother, and she was like, "This is what I think that meant." and proceeded to tell me about it, and I was like, that's the first time I've ever had a conversation with a mum about. So this sort of moment in time I'll always remember about realising the potential and the possibility in Queenstown of doing this work. It's a bit hard to pick one particular thing that we've done, but I think the existence of this thing from the get-go is something I'm really proud of. I'm really proud of delivering the 2023 festival with an incredible team because, you know, the last few years have been pretty tough for the sector. And, you know, we went through a cancellation of our festival on the opening day in 2021 so that we hadn't presented a festival in 5 years. 2018, 2021 was cancelled, and 2023 was the return festival. So to return in with strength and with currency and relatability to everybody for that festival was something I'm really proud of. But I think it's the existence of this thing in the first instance. Like it's almost batshit crazy, to be honest, that it exists because, you know, there's no roadmap for doing this, and there are other examples of programming on the West Coast through 10 days and through the work that Matt was talking about, and there's precursor activity. But galvanising within a community and you know, building the tools to make this happen collectively and then reaching such a high standard with the delivery and the process is something that I look back on and feel quite proud about. And I think the best thing is that the future still isn't written for that organisation. I think its brightest future still lies ahead of it.
Great.
And if I've got one more, if we've got time, please, Matt.
Yeah, sure, one more. Yep.
Oh, hi. Thanks, Travis. It's been wonderful to actually hear the story of your practice and your journey from art school. And I have sitting to my left 2 third-year theatre students and, you know, other students in the room. And obviously in third year, there's a question of what next? Do I leave the island? Do I do honours? You know, do I stay? Do I get a job? You know, and I just wonder, in the few minutes we've got left, have you got any words of advice for the students sort of coming to the end of their degree? And as you say, the roadmap is unclear in creative practice. Can you put yourself back in that spot? And what would you say?
It's a silver bullet question. It took me a while, I think, to really find out. You know, I didn't start working on all of this on the West Coast with this idea that it would last for 15 years. It was just an intuition that this is the right thing to be doing. And I guess the value around what we're doing changed over time. Initially, we thought it's just a good thing for the community. And then we realised, hang on, there's a voice here that's sort of connecting nationally and in some ways internationally, and that's really relevant and important. And then we realised, no, the process needs to be right. Some of those early festivals were really tough. So there's this sort of moving set of goalposts, and it's not like we wrote those down, but they were intuitions more than anything. So it's sort of hard to say. I stumbled into what I was doing, but I just felt like it was the right thing, and then I gave it a crack. And I worked really hard on it without still quite knowing that it was the right approach. So, yeah, I don't have any silver bullet sort of response, but geez, I was really interested just hearing Hannah's talk and the model of constants and, you know, the energy around organisations that are more centrally engaged with artists. There's a sort of future in that still, like there's challenges in that model still, but the direction is there, I think, versus the big unwieldy organisations that none of us can access. So I think we should be still having those conversations about what's next in a devising sense. We need to still be creating the future and sort of moving our way forward. Can feel really tough in that early career stage, but I guess I'm not somebody who came out and just developed all the skills overnight. I lent on a hell of a lot of people and I contacted them. I found people who I thought could be a mentor, and then I found out who mentored them and I contacted them. And I never died asking, or I always asked the question. So I think that's the thing. Like, you know, contact me if you want to talk about anything at all in the future. Like you've just got to sort of go for it. Never die wondering.
We better wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Travis. Round of applause for Travis. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.